Hello, I'm Steph from iDriver Classic, and in today's video we're doing stuff slightly differently. Now usually in these videos we go for a walk round, we talk about the history of the model, but today's car is a little bit special because until today it hadn't been officially on the road for over 20 years, and this is quite a big achievement. My friend Kev, that you'll recognise from all our tinkering series, took this on as a bit of a blind gamble. We found it on Facebook, we rolled with it. Kev put a leap of faith in and an awful lot of hours. And so today we're taking her out on her first maiden voyage. She's on her way home from her first MOT. And so in today's video, I'm going to tell you the story of this particular car. I'm going to tell you why somebody would save a vehicle. And more importantly, we're going to have a no holds barred, honest conversation about how much time and effort it really takes to recommission a car that's been off the road for over 2 decades. And I'm also going to show you what it's like to drive along the way. So come on, let's go and we'll have a look around this car and get a few words from Kev.
Hi, Kevin Hurst here, and I'm here to talk about my new little Triumph, and I'll show you around as we go. I've called him Thomas after the previous owner. What happened was Steph tagged me in a post on the Triumph 1300 and 1500 front wheel drive page on Facebook about this car. As we've said before, sadly the previous chap, who was called Thomas, hence the name of the car, had sadly passed away, and the family were disposing of the car. So I messaged the lady who was selling it. Was the daughter of Thomas, about the car, and said I was interested in it, and it was not too far away from me, just in Southport. So anyway, we agreed a price. And I said I'll go and pick it up. She picked it up with my car transport trailer. Anyway, when I got to the car was very good. It was in very good condition, and it had been off the road, as we said earlier, since 2002. Kept in a garage with a cover on it, and been really, well, basically not used. Now the chap, I don't know a great deal about it, but I can tell that he was very methodical in how the car was, the repair work was done on the car to a very, very, very high standard. And it's always good. It's not good, the circumstances, but you can tell how good somebody was by the standard of work on the car. So the main issue with it was it wasn't running. The fuel tank was full of gum and crud, and just awful, absolutely awful. Anyway, took the tank off, pressure washed it, put some paint stripper in it, put some thinners in it, and it was still bits of brown gunge and stuff. So I pressure washed it out, swilled it out, and then I sealed the tank. The carburettor was stuck. The piston was stuck in the carburettor. The jet was stuck, so I've got a new piston, new needle, new jet, reassembled all that, and eventually it started. So we're still at the trial stage. In fact, it's done today 18 miles, which is more than what it's done in the last 20 years. So I need to readjust the carburettor, which I did adjust the mixture at the MOT, and so we've still got a few more bits and pieces to do. But obviously the brakes are done, and they're all right. So I like to MOT a car. I know you don't have to do, but I do think it's quite important, because at least you know whether the brakes are working correctly as they should be doing, and more importantly, things like the tyres. Now this old gentleman is going to have a brand new set of tyres on it, because these tyres are 25 years old. And I really, having had a tyre blow out on a car on the motorway, fortunately it was a rear one, and the car was rear wheel drive, it was on the Hillman. It's pretty damn scary. And even though this car may have budget tyres on it, it's not going to go for Pirelli, whatever it's going to be. It's going to have budget tyres on, but the budget tyres are better than the old tyres. So I do recommend to have the car MOT'd, because I think it's very, very important. This one I know that the brakes are working, and everything is working as it should do, even though the car will probably do, if I'm honest, 500 miles a year. Although if I do get it out, it might do a little bit more than that. But yeah, it's got the makings of a fantastic car, and these cars are still out there, but sadly the circumstances as to how they come is usually there's a bereavement involved. Otherwise this car would have stayed in the garage, I'm quite sure, till the chap got round to it. But anyway, unfortunately it's gone, and I'm sure Thomas would be grateful that the car is on the road as opposed to being stuck in a garage.
In my opinion, this is one of Triumph's best eras. People get really hung up on those TR cars, but actually these saloons, which are still such great value for money, you can get a decent example for under £4,000. For me, that makes them far better than trying to aim for one of the TR cars, which nowadays all seem to be going well above that £10,000 mark, unless you're going for a real basket case that you've got to work on. So for someone like me, who's got a slimmer budget, this feels like a far more attainable goal. But what's going on with the 1500? Well, if you've ever watched my 1300 video, this is where that styling starts. So in 1965 you get the Triumph 1300, and it comes in and it heralds some really modern bits and pieces, especially against competition. So you've got things like child locks on the rear doors, you've got disc brakes to the front, and there's various other bits and pieces. There's independent rear suspension on the 1300, whereas on this is beam axle at the back. Some people think that takes it away, and there's a few other nice styling designs on the 1300 which sadly we don't see in here, such as the door handles that inside 1300, which fit nicely into the door, beautiful design, whereas you come inside here and it's a lot more conventional. So you start to see that trimming back of costs from Triumph that you then see highly exaggerated in the Toledo. But anyway, it's probably the end of me being incredibly objective today, because this, I think, is just such an attractive design inside, and it doesn't feel as dated as some of the vehicles that you get in from the 60s and 70s. And with the fact that you can count the top speed going up into the high 80s, I think the top speed's around 86, 87 miles per hour. It's a very usable car as well. But what have we got inside, and what do we think is missing that you could maybe bring in as an upgrade? Inside here you've got a locking glove box. Now you can see inside there's not too much room, but you've got enough to get all your essentials in. Into the middle here, you've got your heater control panel. Now I will say that on this, it's working incredibly well. And when it works well, my goodness, does it kick some heat out. So it's more than enough compared to some of the other late 60s, early 70s cars that can sometimes just feel like a mouse's dying breath in the car, and you just think, I need a blanket in with me. Coming in front of you, you've got all your essentials on your dials. So over to your left hand side there, you've got your speedo and you've got your trip clock. In the middle, you've got your all systems go wheel. Now, if you've never seen one of these before, this was a beautiful invention from Triumph. And I always say that it is a tragedy that they didn't carry this over into the Toledo to save money, but you do still get it in the 1500. So essentially, it's all your warning lights for the car are built into that central space. And it means that you haven't got endless lights and bits and pieces dotted around, a bit like when we looked at that it was another Triumph, it wasn't the Spitfire, it was something else. I'm going to just lay it over below, and we were looking at it and I was saying that the dash felt a bit higgledy-piggledy with bits and pieces dotted everywhere. In this, it's uniform and it's correct. And over on the right hand side, you've got your temperature gauge, voltmeter and your fuel gauge all built into one dial there. All very neatly laid out, and everything is all together. Now, the light system for the 1300 is a little bit strange because it operates on two different switches and you end up mucking about with it. On this, we come back to something which is far more rational, and you've got your side and your head there. You can just see the lights coming on, and again, you see what I mean about those quad lights, just very attractive. And you've got two stalks over to the left hand side, you've got 2-speed wipers. Now I point this out as a really good thing to have, because some early cars of the 70s and some later cars into the late 60s, you're still on that single speed wiper. So having 2-speed just makes it a lot more usable in everyday life. Over on your right hand side, you've got your indicators, you've got your horn and your main beam. It's all very logically laid out. However, the one thing I will say is, and that you did start to see in the early 70s, and I think that Triumph really skipped a beat by not putting it into these, is a hazard warning light. And I think very simple to fit something like that into one of these, and it's something that I would highly recommend. Coming into the centre here, you've got your cigar lighter and you've got your choke, and then coming down from there you've got a radio. Now I will say that that radio isn't something that would have been fitted as standard, that is an optional extra. Now there is something in this car that you can fit into the cigar lighter, and it is this Speedy car defroster. Although I will say for the car that the heater is more than sufficient, so you shouldn't really need this. But lovely bit of period kit, and it came with the car as well. Now, there's another really beautiful original detail that I especially love on this car, and it's these 2 tax discs over here. Now one is for your lay care service, and I have never seen that design before. I just really like the fact that it's still in the car. I mean, has it ever been written on? No, and I'm not entirely sure why it's stuck in there, but I really like that. And it's also got the tax disc holder from when the gentleman bought it. Now, the gentleman bought it in 1995 from that garage, and he kept it until his passing. So it's really nice again that that is still in there, and it's just these beautiful bits of history that are dotted throughout the car, and it is very original, and I believe it's the original paint all the way round apart from the 2 front wings. But it must have been done quite early on, because the colour match is bob on and there's no real difference, and you can't pick it up in pictures or film. So well done to whoever did that. Now remember, we've got that 1500 engine in this, and you might know that I've had a lot of problems with my 1300 with the input shaft. So it's worth mentioning as well that whilst you lose things like independent rear suspension, Triumph did improve some bits, because the input shaft on these is, I think it's thicker, and I think it might be slightly longer, and it means that it's a better fit and they're less likely to break under stress than the 1300s. So if you are trying to choose between the 2 models, I would say go for the 1500, not only for the speed, but because you get that as well. Now you're probably wondering what she sounds like. Well, I'm going to start her up and let you have a little listen. Might need a bit of choke. Yep, we're definitely going to need that choke. To say that it's April, it's awfully chilly. I will say as well that a lot of these all systems go wheels quite often fail, so you tend to find that 1 or 2 lights behind them, or the sensors just don't all line up anymore, whereas everything on this one seems to work, which is quite impressive actually. Now give her a little rev, we'll have a listen outside, and then I'll take you for a drive. Now, we'll say that you're probably going to hear a bit of road noise coming up through, but that's just because the roads are so bad around here. But the one thing I will say is you'll hear the road noise, oh, as if by magic. You will hear the road noise, but you don't actually feel it, because I don't know if you saw, by the way, in just how great the condition of these seats were, but as well as that, they are incredibly generously upholstered, which means that you know sometimes when you get in older vehicles and you feel everything come up through your spine and through your back end, you don't feel it in this at all. You're very cushioned from what's going on outside, which is quite a blessing really, because let's face it, they've got no plans to resurface these roads, so you've got to find something that's, well, going to give you a bit more of a pleasurable ride. Now, as I set off in first, it's worth mentioning that she does have a bit of clutch judder. Now, I was talking to Kev about this, and he said I'm a bit disappointed because I've changed the gearbox mountings. And I said, well, do you think it might settle down with a bit of use? And he said, yeah, hopefully. And I guess it's just one of those things that when you get a car like this, and by the way, his name is Thomas, especially when you put a car back on the road that hasn't been on the road for a while, you end up doing a bit of shakedown essentially to see what's going on. And Kev said it might just work itself out. It'd be one of those little nuances. But as we cruise along, you'll see that Thomas has quite a lot of get up and go. And with that 4-speed gearbox, you've kind of got everything you need. And it is worth saying as well that it's a fully synchro box, which for the time, against some of the other cars that were still being released new with a 4-speed box with no synchro on first, it does feel, you know, quite a nice step forward, and it means that it's quite usable in modern traffic. Now when you read the stats on these, for a later one it's got 65 brake horsepower, but if you look at an earlier one, at some point, so they got released in 1970, these single carb ones, and the single carb runs until 73. The cars from 1970 and part of 1971 are marketed as having 61 brake horsepower, but both of them show that same top speed of 86, 87. So again, it just makes it so usable, doesn't it? Now as we cruise along, you'll see that the steering is quite responsive, it's quite light, it's sprightly enough to keep up with all the traffic, and all in all, it's just a very usable classic car. It's a little bit noisier inside than perhaps somebody that's used to more modern stuff would like, but remember, you can take away some of that by dynamating cars, and it adds a bit of sound deadening. But for me, I quite like the fact it's original. We get the experience as it would have been. And with this being a relatively low mileage example, it's on, by the way, just shy of 50,000 miles from new. It's, you know, it's just so how it would have been, and I love that. I love it when you get in something and you get to experience it as somebody in the 70s would have. Now as we cruise down, you'll be able to see as well that those quad headlamps give you enough light across the road to again just give you great visibility. So all of this together just makes it such a usable and attractive prospect. Now I don't know about you, but if you're watching this with a buying frame of mind and thinking, should I go for one of those? One of the cars that quite often people go for instead, if they're looking at kind of that, they want a 60s or a 70s saloon that's quite usable, is they look at an ADO 16 across all the variants. But here's the thing, these are very much an unappreciated classic, along with in many ways the Toledo as well. And people get really excited about the Dolomite because it's fast and it's quick and it's sexy, and they look at stuff like this and they just kind of overlook it, which means that it's good news for you as a buyer, because you can get a really great example for the same money that if you're looking at an ADO 16, you can get an okay example. And the club support is fantastic. So if you buy one of these, you can get into the Triumph Dolomite Club, which is really good, Club Triumph. There are loads of Triumph groups and clubs out there with quite a cracking social scene actually. So you don't just buy into the car, but you get to buy into the lifestyle as well, which for me makes it quite the attractive prospect, because you get it all rolled into one. Now as we cruise down here, let's see if we can get a bit more. I do think that perhaps that carb needs a bit of a tune-up, because I'm sure that it should be giving us a little bit more than it is. But look, it's Thomas's first day back on the road. I don't think we're going to judge him too harshly. You know, as Kev said to me, there's still a few little tweaks that he wants to do. There's still a few bits that he would like to perfect, but we're seeing this car in all its raw glory. Over 20 years parked up, doing nothing, covered in a layer of dust, waiting for glory to come back. And here it is, back on the road, ready for show season and ready for film work as well, because cars like this, there were 66,000 of these made in quite a short frame of time. I think there were 66,000 made between 70 and 73, and then when they got up to the 1500 TC, I think there were about 25,000 of those made. And so they were commonplace. People recognised them along with the Toledo. But nowadays, when it comes down to filming jobs, stuff like this can be quite thin on the ground. So this will be going into TV and film work. And I said to Kev, you have got to come to some shows this year. So Kev said to me as well that he'll be coming out for various high days and holidays. And hopefully we'll be able to try and twist his arm to get him to drive down for Rustival too, because we'll be taking this back to Coventry. Because I know that Triumph that's another thing I should mention, it's got a bit of a crunch on third gear. And I know that Triumph's made in different places. These 1500s were made in Coventry, so it seems only right that the car gets to go back to where she came from. Now it's almost time to go back to Kev's house and the workshop, get a few bits and pieces done, but I'm sure you'll agree that this, with its disc brakes to front, its fully synchro 4-speed box and a top speed in the high 80s when that carb's running at optimum energy, it's a very usable classic indeed. Although maybe that gearbox does need a little bit of a rebuild. But look, as we say, first day back on the road in over 2 decades, there's going to be little things to do. But if you're watching from home and you're thinking, do I or do I not? 100% I back going for one of these. They're great fun to drive. You can fit all your mates in. There's so much room inside. You've got plenty of elbow room. If your bottom's a little bit on the larger side like mine, it won't be hanging off the seats. The seats are lovely and wide. There's not too many bad things you can say about these. If you are comparing it to something like the ADO 16, I do prefer the gear change, but really all in all, there's not that much in it. They are incredibly good fun. And in a world where there's not a lot of fun to be had, putting your life into a classic car, I thoroughly recommend it. Changed my life and I always recommend it to others. And I know that a lot of people think these are too old and sometimes overlook them, but honestly you can have just as much fun with a 70s car as you can with something more modern from the 90s. And best of all, parts are quite easy to come by for all of these. Well, that's it from me today. It's time to put Thomas back. But until next Sunday when we'll be talking about Drive It Day, take care and drive safely.